So I'm sat here today with Alex Frood of Mispronounced Adventures. Hi, Alex. How are you doing, chap?
Hey, I'm well. Yourself?
Good. Yeah, can't complain. Can't complain. We're just going to do a quick chat, see how you're getting on, because we found your channel not too long ago, and your adventures were really interesting. So, do you want to let us sort of introduce yourself and let everyone know what kind of your channel encompasses?
Sure. So I run a channel called Mispronounced Adventures. The reason for that is I'm a dyslexic guide, so the name, so Mispronounced Adventures. But I kind of started the channel during sort of the COVID era because I work overseas a lot, taking people all over the globe. And funnily enough, clients in international travel didn't work very well with COVID. And I'd always had a van, as many outdoor instructors do. And then came COVID. I had changed circumstances. I thought I'd buy a bigger van and build a house to live in, really. So the channel started off with being me just sort of building the van and how I was building this van. And it sort of grew from there, and it's grown into now me doing a bit more of the sort of extreme travel I would do professionally, but the van has been able to facilitate that with some of the more crazy European trips up into the Arctic and so on. So yeah, it's all about building vans, but also particularly playing with electrics because I do love experimenting with electronics and electrics, and the van is very much set up to do that for me. But yeah, there's a lot of experimental sort of things. Opposed to just this is how everyone does it. It's more I look at the why and how things work, and also can I make that work in a van?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of one of the ways in which we found you, with your DC to DC video, especially because you looked at how the DC to DC chargers worked and then elevated that almost just by reading the manual and understanding the product. So do you want to sort of, explain sort of that a little bit more from your side, because you've probably got a bit more nuance on how you went about that?
Oh, so the Victron Orion DC to DC charger is probably at the minute one of the most popular around battery to battery chargers with vehicles who've got smart alternators in.
Yeah.
So, but lots of people know it. It overheats quite a lot, or they don't often get the advertised 30 amp hours out. 30 amps out of it.
Yeah.
People often find it throttles back after half an hour of use to 25, or sometimes even towards even lower. But reading the manual, it does state that is a part of the unit. It lowers the output ampage just to protect the unit from overheating. But when you actually read the manual, it says that the 30 amps, which everyone knows is a 30 amp charger, is only at 40 degrees, and then above 40 degrees it decreases it. But there's a second line in the manual which then says at lower temperatures, so at 25 degrees, as their example, it actually outputs higher. So it's not a fixed output. It seems the output is always variable.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my idea was, well, everyone knows it kind of throttles back, but if I keep the unit cooler, will it output higher? And it just kind of it worked really well. So
having dealt with the units for a long time and seeing how you went through that process of reading the manual, understanding the product with so much insight that you were like, well, hang on a minute, if I cool it, I'm going to increase its efficiency, which you did very, very well. And relatively easy, I think, as well. It was quite a simple solution.
I think there were like two variations I could have gone for. There could have been cooling it kind of with a little bit of extra fan just to make the unit perform better in general, or try and get your 30 amps, which is what's listed. But I kind of took the sort of like PC gamers overclockers route and went, I want maximum possible performance I can get out of the unit, or to hit the maximum possible it's advertised at. I think it's advertised about 30 amp or 360 watt, but it does say at 25 degrees you'll get about 430 watt, and that's what I wanted to achieve. So opposed to going for a small fan, I went for sort of the largest or a reasonably powerful blower fan to go for maximum cooling efficiency, and just see how it worked. And to be honest, it worked really well. Because I had two units in the van, I was able to mount one of them, mount them next to each other, have cooling completely turned off on one unit, and have my cooling turned on the other. Use thermal cameras to get all the statistics on what's actually happening. And I was seeing on a half an hour idling test in perfect mounting conditions around about a 30-degree difference in units. The uncooled unit was getting to about, I think a while ago, about 59 degrees, and then starting to throttle back towards 27, 28 amps. and the cooled unit was at just about 29 degrees, or just about 30 or above 30, and that was still outputting at the half an hour stage about 32 and a half amps. So my real world performance was almost increased by 25% of what I would normally get when it overheats versus what I was getting with my new cooling system. And 25 to 30% is quite a big increase in output.
Yeah, especially when you're living off grid, and you're relying on that energy. I mean, that kind of engineering background, where does that sort of come from? Is that something you've always been passionate about when you were a kid, or?
I think fiddling about. I've always been passionate about making things. I don't have a formal engineering background. My degree is in computer games design. That's what actually my degree's in.
Oh,
wow. My first class honours in that, so unrelated to what I do professionally, which is work in jungles and mountain ranges and deserts. But that sort of always in tinkering, or I think even with video games growing up, it was seeing how they worked. It was working on video game mods and working on mods that way. So always figuring out how stuff works and ticks. And doing the van work, starting building the van kind of was my introduction to 12-volt electrics or DC electrics. And after that kind of clicked, I kind of started to learn about how different things work and how I can sort of use that to work for me. And a lot of those areas I'm finding people maybe haven't done them in the vehicles before. For examples with off-grid domestic housing and how people heat things and how people do different things, I was finding there wasn't that much conversion into the van world at the time. So that's what I was sort of playing around with. And I didn't need the higher output, or I didn't necessarily need, when I put the second charger in, I didn't need the extra power that I used too much. It was more, well, if I can charge faster because I know the alternator in my van is big enough, why not? Why am I not using that energy, or why am I not getting the most out of the device I've got? I think it was being able to recharge faster because I could, not because I needed it.
Sort of showed, I think, a lot of people, including myself and things like that, that these things are possible to do and improve upon. Because I think a lot of people will just install the unit on a wooden sort of unit or a metal unit and leave it and suffer as a result. But of course, if they can get that little bit extra with a little bit of backwards engineering essentially of the manual, then I think that really helps and benefits everyone. So I mean, you touched on that you visit lots of various wonderful, weird places as part of your job, and you built your van for that. What sort of considerations did you have to keep in mind when building the van in regards to the travels and the places that you visit?
So building the van, I wanted to build it very much as a 4-season vehicle, and generally European or summer conditions. The summer season, the autumn, the spring aren't so much of the issue. The sort of 4th season bit I wanted was the winter stuff, because I love the cold. I used to work quite a lot in Scotland, all over guiding in the winter, and a few Himalayan peaks as well. So I enjoy the extreme cold. And then having the van sort of meant I could facilitate. Actually, one day I realised, well, I can actually now just drive to the Arctic. So building the van from scratch was one. It was very much an insulation as a main point, not to go over the top, because most people have diesel heaters, and even on a van of my size, the diesel heater runs on low and only used maybe 25% more fuel on the big winter Arctic trip I did, where we're looking like minus 20 and below. Didn't use that much more, but the main considerations were having the majority of my water tanks inside. Which is what I think quite a few people put them underneath, which is fine for most of the time in British winter as well, but getting to those extreme cold temperatures, have them inside. And for the electrics, it was, well, the 2 battery chargers were a big thought later on the work I needed to do for the winter, because there is going to be next to no solar up in the Arctic in the winter. I mean, the sun's only up a couple hours a day, so more power when the engine's running was definitely one of the main points. And how to keep a lot of the electrics warm was the main bit, especially because I use lithium batteries, and they don't like to be charged below. Not don't like to be charged; it's damaging to be charged for the chemistry when it's below zero. So I built sort of two different heating systems, an active one and a passive one for those lithium batteries I've got. One of them being just your standard sort of heating packs, because when I got my ones, not many batteries on the market had heating pads. I know more people like Roma and a few of the other battery companies are now including heating pads in their batteries if you want like their extreme models. Which I think is great, and that's also positive for UK conditions. You would still get your batteries to 0 degrees if you're up in Scotland in the winter or below. So I built them into insulated boxes, and I built some little automatic heating pads underneath, which have a little temperature controlled relay, and that turned on, and that worked really well. It just you didn't need to get the batteries hot. You just need to get them not zero for charging. But one of the biggest changes I made, particularly for the Arctic trip, which is what I don't see, or not a mistake, but a design people don't often think about, is most people, even if they put their batteries in an insulated box, they put it directly on the floor of the van. So 100% contact with the cold surface, which is the floor. So one of the major changes I made was I lifted those insulated boxes with batteries off the floor and put some wooden battens underneath it. So only about 5% of the battery's insulated box actually touches the floor. So like breaks that cold bridge. And then additionally, because the diesel heater is nearby, I didn't vent the diesel heater directly under the batteries, but I have a little, I think 1 watt computer fan which just wafts warm air from the diesel heater compartment, just blows it under that air gap under the batteries, and that was effectively keeping the batteries warm for free in the especially in the Arctic conditions, because if the heater's on to keep me warm, then it's probably cold enough that the batteries could get below zero. So that little computer fan just pumps warm air underneath the batteries effectively for free, and keeps the batteries, even on the Arctic trip, they were always about 18 degrees, even when it was minus 27 outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think like you said, those heated batteries are becoming really good and really efficient nowadays. But as you said, if you've got a heater and you've got that free energy, then you can even save a little bit of money by not buying the lithium with a built-in heater, because they do tend to be more expensive anyway. So it's just, again, it encompasses what your channel did when it was with the van building, was just slight tweaks to the way things are built and engineered to make it more efficient for you. You mentioned your big trip that you did to the Arctic, where you hit minus 20 degrees. Which seems crazy in a van. What made you decide to do that? Was it just literally for the challenge, or
not? I guess not so much for. I mean, challenge is one way of looking at it. It wasn't that I was going to go hunt it because it was going to be difficult. It was that doing those sort of things is normal for me. Like, I will go climb a peak in the Indian Himalayas for fun. That's what I would do for fun. It's not necessarily, I'm doing this big challenge. That's what I do normally, because that's my skill set, sort of thing. It's the way I look at it. So, and to figure out that I could go to one of the environments I've worked a little bit less in the extreme cold, but just drive there in my house, and I set myself a goal for that trip, which was to get to Nordkapp, which was to go north until North ran out. So I went to Nordkapp, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, is the most northerly point on continental Europe in the middle of winter. And it was just to go out there and live in the van and get used to it, sort of thing, and just see how well things performed. And there were testing points and to test me, test the vehicle and what I built. But it was a challenge. It wasn't that I set out like a challenge where I think there was a chance of failure. In a sense, it was that I wanted to just experience it more than a challenge.
Yeah, and to be fair, the trip, we watched the whole series when it came out, and it was very fascinating to see that not only had you, because you've got the experience, you planned as much as you could for the van, but you did still hit some of those like hurdles. I know at one point your engine froze.
It was a fun day. I thought a lot of people commented on that one saying, "Oh, you weren't worried." Well, I wasn't worried because I knew exactly what was going on. I understand how the engine works. I understand why it wasn't working and how that was going to get fixed. So one of the modifications I made for the van was I added an engine preheater, which effectively is a bit like an air diesel heater, only it heats liquid and it heats your coolant system instead. And that was a whole fun project to get in. Normally they are very expensive bits of Webasto equipment, but I got my ones from a crashed Range Rover Discovery 3 and 4. I bought them off eBay for under £30 for 2 of them.
Perfect.
And then I had fun with electrics, getting them all working again, because they're a little bit of a complicated unit. But actually plumbing it into the vehicle, what I would normally do every day on that trip, because I have a little button on my dashboard, which I press, and that turns on. And it spends maybe about half an hour heating the engine up to about 80 degrees and then shuts itself down. On that particular day where the engine froze, it was the first really, really cold night of the trip. I think it was minus 25 that night. And the coolant mix in the van wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't have a kind of one of the little things where you can test the glycol. Which I do now have, so I don't have that issue again. The problem with Yeah, the coolant in the engine turned to slush. It didn't freeze solid. That's catastrophic for your engine.
Yes.
But it turned to slush, so really like viscous, which means the little pump the engine preheaters have couldn't physically pump it around. So the preheater would turn on, and then it was shut down after a minute or two because it just couldn't pump the coolant around because it was so slushy, and then it would overheat. So I had to wait till I think it was a good 7 or 8 hours where I knew it was going to warm up from a chilly -25 to a balmy -15.
Yeah.
And after, so it's still cold, but I knew at that point it would be liquid again. So, but that was kind of one of the advantages of having quite a big battery bank as well in the van, because it meant I had no worries about that. I used a heat gun for a little while to heat up different components of the engine for a while. I had a diesel heater still running full to keep me warm. And then I waited 7 hours, it all thawed out. At that point, the starter battery was actually flat, so I did reverse DC chargers. I swapped them around so the leisure system would charge the starter system just for about 10 minutes because it didn't need much. And then after the engine preheater started and the starter battery was charged again, flicked the key and it just turned on like a summer's day. I didn't even cough. The same on most of the things out there. It's started like no different than a warm day because the engine pretty much is warm. Other bits of the van are still cold, but maybe mostly the engine and its lubricants are nice and warm again.
Warmish, yeah. No, it was a really interesting video because I remember watching it thinking I myself would be in a panic thinking, how am I going to defrost this engine? But you were very cool, you're very calm, and as you said, even to the point where you're like, well, my starter battery's now flat. Well, luckily I've got a big enough leisure system I can reverse that and fix it. So, and I think that's a real testament of your job as well and how resourceful you are when you go out on those expeditions. I think there was only one point during your expedition where you had maybe potentially a hair-raising moment that threw you off a little bit, and that was when you were in that storm.
So the storm, on the other hand, is I got all the way to about 20 miles south of Nordkapp. So almost completed the goal. And driving has generally been very easy, to be honest. Whilst it's cold and there are things you learn along the way, road conditions weren't that problematic. I hadn't had any storms until that point. So I picked the park up. There was either this car park, which is sort of on the ocean. When you're that far north, most of the roads are on the coast.
Yeah.
So it was like that one car park, or I could have gone into the town, which was maybe like 3 or 4 miles away on the other side of the bay, and slept in the supermarket car park. So I thought, you know what, there's a chance of Northern Lights tonight. I'll sleep in the nice car park. I looked at the weather forecast, and it was going to be a storm. It was going to be a bit windy. It was meant to be gusting, I think, up to 64 mile per hour, which is quite windy. But I've been personally out in, as not with a vehicle, but with myself, in far windier up in Scotland working, or out in the hills having a good day, or getting caught out. So I anticipated it was going to be a bit windy, and I've been in mountain car parks before, and you've had the van rock around, and I get many people have been in their vans and had the wind blow them around and wind rock them around. But it was a forecast, and forecasts are only forecasts.
Yeah.
So over the course of the night, when I got there, it was quite still. I did some time-lapse photography, and there was no real problem with the wind. And then the wind started to pick up as it was going to, and it got quite windy. Like the van was shaking a bit, and I was watching the town out of the window, and then the town lost all power and blacked out.
Yeah.
Power cut, and I was thinking, oh, actually, this might be getting a bit windy. So I started to look at options for where I could potentially move to. There was like a little car park, which was, I think, was some police storage depot where you wouldn't sleep normally, nor is it appropriate. But I thought that's about 100 meters down the road. That's potentially somewhere I might move to for some shelter.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of lying in bed. Well, it's meant to be dying down, and suddenly it just amped up a few ratings, and I parked the van into the wind as you normally would, and the wind direction changed, and then a big gust. Well, the wind direction changed, and the other problem was the temperature had risen to 2 degrees. So all the really nice temperatures when it's like sub-zero, then you've got the snow and ice, and that's all really grippy. Because there's not really much black ice, which we see in this country. It's all like 3-4 snow all the time, so it's not very slippy. Like the tyres had no problem for the thousands of miles driving to get up there.
Yeah.
But because it rose to 2 degrees and was raining, that all turned to about 5 inches of slush. Which didn't matter if you've got studded tyres or you've got all-terrain tyres with big tread, nothing grips on that.
No.
And then the wind changed and swung the van sideways from stationary whilst I was in bed. So I quickly went, well, actually, this is probably the time to move. I can no longer stay here because I was next to the ocean. That is a potential risk, and because it had spun the van sideways, the van was now like broadside onto the wind. So the next big gust of wind could have, on the spot, probably rolled the van over. So I dived into the front seat, started the engine, turned the aux lights on, and then waited for a little lull in the storm, just when that next gust ended, and then drove to the car park I had scouted on the map. And just as I got there and turned the corner, the next gust came in. So I'd made it round sort of the slushy, icy bend at a moderate speed. It was fine for driving. If you panic in those sorts of situations, then you are going to slide around. As soon as I got round that corner, the next gust of wind came in and caught the back of the van, which then threw the back of the van out and then ploughed me into a snowdrift. Where I was like, all right, well, I better get out of my onesie and I'll put some wet weather clothes on. So I'll go dig the van out, and then the next gust of wind, as I just doing my boots up, came from the opposite direction and then threw the van out of the snowdrift back into the road, which was very convenient.
Very nice of it.
And then I decided to hide behind a big snowbank for the rest of the evening. Unfortunately for me, that car park was safe from any objective danger, like sliding into the ocean. But it was a bit of a train trap. It was a big bowl, so wind came from every direction.
Yeah.
I was extremely buffeted, and even at those points, you're like, well, it couldn't slide anymore. I particularly found some very wet, kind of deepish snow of that snowbank and just kind of buried the van's wheels in it, so it wasn't going to slide anywhere. But then I was just kind of, well, the danger's gone. I can just muck around now for the next 4 hours and just have a bit of a time to see how it goes. However, the shipping container at the top of that car park blew open, and it decided to rain full-size fire extinguishers down on me in the van for the next hour, which was just plainly hilarious for me. I just found it funny. But where I turned the lights on again, why are there 4 fire extinguishers in front of me and a bunch of them behind? But yeah, and then looked at the forecast, knew it was going to die down about 4 o'clock, or said it would, and that's what it did. Die down at 4 o'clock. Drove out of the car park with no issue, drove over to the supermarket, decided I'll have a sleep there for a couple of hours, where I found all the other overland vehicles and trucks hiding for the evening. But then I heard similar stories the following morning when I was chatting to them on the way up to Nordkap. Quite a few other people got caught out that night, and I think even some local lorries and trucks got blown over. So it's just a mistake on my behalf, where I under-anticipated what the weather could be. And the situation I was in probably wasn't the best. Just kind of not kind of understanding that the weather up there is pretty extreme, which I knew anyway. I just made a mistake, and I kind of fully own up to that. Was not the best park up that evening. But anyway, everywhere I was getting buffeted around. I just had one which was not a particularly good spot that night. But I made the video, owned up, and I got a lot of interesting feedback for people who again go, oh, what an idiot being there, blah blah blah. All people who weren't in that situation and didn't actually kind of see what was going on. It was one way, if you had fully panicked and you hadn't done anything, it would have ended in disaster a lot.
And I mean, and to be fair, again, that's a testament to you, because as you said, people will say you did the wrong thing, you had the wrong tire on, or you were in the wrong car parking space and all that, and tires wouldn't have helped regardless. Let's be honest, but even with everything else, you did the right thing after doing the wrong thing by not panicking, getting yourself into a safer position. And I think again that really shows sort of through. So I know you're planning your next trip in the van. Again, it's going to be another Arctic one, I believe. Is that right?
Yes. So next big trip in the van is the Arctic again. I just really enjoyed it, and I had to come back last time after about 30 days because I had some work. Unfortunately, that work got cancelled 20 miles before Calais, so I drove 2,000 miles back for nothing. But it I definitely wanted more. I just loved pretty much every minute up there.
Yeah.
And whilst last time I had the kind of arbitrary goal of going north until north ran out, this time the arbitrary goal is wanting to find -40. So It was quite a mild winter last year. I only saw -27 in February, and a few of my friends who I know who live up in that area said, it was quite a mild winter. You should have seen at least like the mid-30s. So going back this winter to hopefully go find -40, and I think it's an interesting goal because it means I'm going to go to not so much the normal touristy areas.
Yes.
because a lot of people do go up to Nordkap in the winter. Well, not necessarily a lot. Like a small handful of nutters go up to Nordkap in the winter, and then everyone goes to Tromsø and the Lofoten Islands, and then sort of makes their way back down. So I thought, if I'm hunting for -40, it means I'm going to be looking at the forecasts and the maps and driving to areas where the weather's going to be cold and not necessarily where people normally go. So I thought it'd be a way to see the lesser known areas for that trip. This time going out about the first week of January. So January, I think it's January or December are the coldest months.
Yeah, and I think as well, like as you said, because you'll be moving away from those touristy areas and potentially even the towns and things like that, you'll see even more amazing sights. Because I know you got to see things like the Northern Lights and the Milky Way belt, sort of whilst you're out, and those kind of sights, must be amazing to see when you're out on your travels.
Yeah, definitely. The Northern Lights were generally pretty common. Like they would be out every night in different powers, but it's more often it's cloudy is more the issue. They're there most of the time at night. It's just some displays are more powerful than others, but most of the time it's the clouds. But I did have probably 3 or 4 really good sightings. So again, it'd be great to go to some nice remote areas and just enjoy sort of watching the Northern Lights again, because they are truly spectacular to see, and they are, when you're that far north, they are very, very bright. Yeah. It's quite amazing that you see lots of time-lapse photography or time-lapse videos of the Northern Lights, where they do look bright, and they do, if they're powerful display, look that bright in reality as well. But what the time-lapses kind of don't do is the Northern Lights themselves are, whilst in some ways very slow, they're also very, very quick. You don't see you see often like the new fingers starting to rise and then shooting off everywhere, and how quickly the waves can be waving back and forth, which doesn't come across in time-lapse video.
Yeah.
It's just really, really quite amazing to go see and go watch up there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things is one of those things that, as much as you can see it on a video or a photograph, it's always one of those things that if you see it in person, it's a whole different experience.
The other thing is, with the Northern Lights and how people kind of have seen them in video and photo, is I think you always kind of think they've got noise, because everyone's always got like really orchestral or wonderful music in the background, but actually you're in a really, really cold environment, and so and obviously it doesn't make any noise, so it's completely dead silent.
Yeah,
it's cold. It is a lot quieter, which is the kind of the weird bit, because everyone kind of sees all their videos with like lovely background music, and what you do as well. It looks weird in video if you don't have any kind of music or anything to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's one of the great bits, is just experiencing them. You can watch them for hours until you freeze, but you can watch them for hours.
So with you now seeking out colder temperatures, are there any upgrades and changes that you're having to make to the van, do you think, for that, or is the van pretty much where you'd like it to be?
It is more or less where I would like it to be. The coolant is one I'm gonna redo the coolant again.
Yeah.
So after the cold issue last year, I did the following day or the day afterwards, I did a coolant change in a lay-by in -14 because I knew it needed to be fixed. More or less, the upgrade-wise, I'm pretty happy with how it all worked out. So one of the other things I do as like a temporary for that trip, is I've got on the back doors and on the sliding door, I have like a big quilt, like the material people often use for the windscreen. I built like a big almost duvet which covers all the door seams and covers up to keep. I just keep them on for the month, and that kind of keeps on a lot more heat. And the other one was which I sort of did even for the UK winter, with I had a big sliding door, so I took the bulkhead out of my van. But I still wanted access, so I have a big insulated sliding door which slides back behind the shower room, so you can easily walk through into the cab. Because a lot of the heat is lost. You can put all this insulation in your vehicle, but if you've got an open bulkhead and you've still got a huge glass windows, so I would often find in the morning is that in the back of the van it's 21 degrees because I've got the diesel heater on its thermostat, maintaining like a perfect temperature, and then you open the sliding door to get into the cab, and it'd be -20 in the cab.
Yeah, massive change in temperature.
Yeah, so insulation is definitely a very important feature, and there's nothing I'm going to change this time round, because heating will easily, even if you had no insulation, you could keep the van a lot warmer you keep the van warm with the diesel heater.
Yeah.
But the second you turn it off, it's going to you're going to get cold pretty quick, or the diesel is going to have to run a lot harder. Yeah. I think the diesel wise for that trip for heating, I used 55 litres of diesel to heat the van over the course of that entire trip.
Wow. Okay.
Which in the UK, I think I use, if I'm keep the diesel heater on all night on thermostat up in the winter in, say, Scotland, I think I use about 1 to 1.2 litres of diesel overnight.
Yeah. So
that trip, 55 litres for 30 days, it was about 1.5 litres to 1.7 litres of diesel per night. So very kind of a smaller increase than I actually thought it would be.
Yeah.
Using about 300, 400 mil more of diesel per night is not as big as I thought it would be for that Arctic trip.
So, I mean, you're going out looking for this -40. Are there any areas in particular that you're looking to hit to do that, or are you just going to try and see where the temperature takes you?
I think primarily it's going to be the northern interior of Finland, because that's an area I don't know if many people have gone to, because most people go up north and then go towards the west. So I'm going to go towards the east. And potentially, if the weather's all right and there are a bit more storms at that time of year, I might look at going to the most northeasterly point in mainland Europe, which is still Norway. It's just one of the other peninsulas further to the east, which could be quite interesting to go to. I've had a few friends who've gone there in the summer, so I might potentially look at that as an option. But yeah, I think I'll probably go back to the ice hotel again in Kiruna in northern Sweden, because again, that's a nice big interior of northern Sweden, so there's going to be cold temperatures there, and it's just a really interesting, wonderful place to visit, the ice hotel. But no, more or less just roam around and sort of see what's going on. I'll probably go see Santa again, because that was good fun last time.
Why not?
Yeah, he's a top bloke, Santa.
Yeah.
And we talked about van life. It was brilliant. We talked about van life for like 10 minutes.
Well, I believe he has delivered a few gifts for van lifers in the past, so I think he's having to get used to the mobile homes, essentially, that he's having to visit.
Definitely. So yeah, more or less the northern Finland, and potentially, I think hopefully see a few more people who are up there as well. I know a few people who are going to head up to the same area at the same sort of time of year as well. It'd be nice to hang out and have adventures with other people. I always personally prefer doing trips with other people.
Yeah.
I think it's more fun to bounce ideas off people. Bounce different ideas and do different things different people want, and it's just kind of more fun. I personally find as a collective experience.
So, apart from the Arctic trip that you've got planned next year, is there anywhere else you're taking the van?
Ooh, I would definitely like to go back into sort of mainland Europe and Romania again. So the previous trip I spent about a week and a half in Romania in the van, which was in about November. We were with it, October, November. So we went to Bran Castle, which is the Castle Dracula house for Halloween. We wanted to go to the big Halloween party there, which was going to be good fun. It's slightly cancelled due to COVID at the time, but still a really fun Halloween themed tour of the castle, and just a good fun time. It's got some amazing mountain roads, the Transalpina and the Transfogarian mountains, which I think old Top Gear went over and said like these are the best driving roads in the world. We went to go drive up there, and we got halfway up before we found the big bollards, because they closed on November 1st, and that was the day we were driving up. So, but it was a very, very open and free one where you could sort of drive. There's a lot of dirt roads, a lot of gravel tracks you can go to drive around, which, unlike the UK where you're very limited access to those type of roads, there it's quite normal to go drive on those. So yeah, quite like to go back to experience more of Romania. I don't quite know when.
But I think that's a really good place to end the interview, Alex. It's been fantastic sort of hearing your insights into how to tweak vans and make them maybe a little bit better for different situations, and to hear about your sort of upcoming trip, and we wish you the best of luck. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find you if they do want to follow your trip?
Yeah, sure. So if anyone wants to follow the upcoming Arctic trip, or watch some of the older European series, or the last year's Arctic trip, or earlier this year's Arctic trip, my YouTube channel and Instagram is Mispronounced Adventures, and it's a combination of van-related travel in more the extreme end, and me mucking around with silly electrics to make silly things work for my smart home on wheels, really.
Brilliant. No, that's super. We'll also put some links in the description to your Instagram and website as well, so people can check out your photography as well, because you're a very good photographer as well. So we'll do that. But yeah, thank you very much, Alex, and we wish you the best of luck.